Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Two.
To who?
No, it's to whom. Welcome to the Video Reformation Podcast. I'm Ben Oliver.
All for it. I'm Justin Plant.
We're the co-founders of Storyboard Media and your guides to practicing effective video for business. We're like the Don Diego de la Vega to your Alejandro Murrieta in The Mask of Zorro. You know that one, right? There it is. So today we're going to teach you how to...
For listeners, that was a Z with my sword.
Right. Well, that's why you watch the video version, is so that you can actually see.
Get all the extra features.
Yeah. Maybe we overdub snaps instead of your shushes, and then it just looks like you're doing that. So today we're going to be talking about... We're going to be teaching you how to build your own video roadmap. Before we do, though, sad to announce that we've not been able to draw over the same sponsor. Once is, just once. Twice is a coincidence. 54 times is probably a bit. That we're just really, what episode are we in? 40?
Somewhere around there.
We're in the 40s, 50s, something like that. So new sponsor this week. Stick around later in the episode to hear the full spot, but our sponsor this week is Plant Magic. Yeah. That could go anywhere, really.
Yeah.
Or
do anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, without all these typical starting things, we're jumping right into the topic.
It's about time. Yeah. I was listening to one of our other ones.
It would take far too long to get to the topic. Okay. So how to build your own video roadmap. I don't necessarily want to make it seem like this is something that we do as magic, or maybe this is like the magician the illusionist that nobody likes, who like reveals the tricks. I set you up for it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
There's a couple steps behind this morning, so.
Yeah, that's okay.
It does feel like there's a little bit of magic involved, which I think is going to be the difficult part on, the second half of this episode.
Yeah. Or part two of this episode, depending on how on point we are for part one. So let me start by asking you, what is a video roadmap?
Well, it's I guess a phrase or term that we've used to describe a video strategy, that is a video strategy. So when we create these video roadmaps, a lot of times we'll spend a certain number of weeks with our clients, different stakeholders, asking a lot of very intense questions about their marketing department or their sales processes or any number of things. And in the end, we get to tell them, all right, here strategically, these are the videos you need to make over the next 8 months. Mm-hmm. And so it's a nice way to build a budget for your video efforts. It's a nice way to kind of corral some efforts and all be pointed in the same direction as a team.
I think it also provides you the context of what all the videos you intend to make are also. Because so often you get into those conversations creatively or strategically about what do we want to say in this video. And the default for most people when they're starting out with videos, they want to do like one video that speaks to everybody. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the problem when you just jump in and say, oh, we need a product video. But you don't know. Yeah, you said the context. I get it. But like.
But if you, to pull on that thread, if you did so we've got a client right now where they said we want to do an overview video of our product. Mm-hmm. And so we started scripting that. And in one of our first review sessions with the client, we had picked a relatable use case. The client said, well, this feels too retail specific. How are we going to address hospitality and how are we going to address healthcare? Because those are, retail, hospitality, and healthcare are like our three top industries. And then the recommendation was, now this is also making video without a roadmap in place. Mm-hmm. And so then it occurred to us to make an industry agnostic overview of the product, and then 3 industry specific where we could use those use cases and highlight those differentiators that are specific to, the privacy concerns with like the HIPAA constraints in healthcare apply directly to that where they don't necessarily with retail or travel and hospitality.
Yeah.
And so if you were to have done it the other way around, knowing that we're going to do a product overview video that's industry agnostic, but then we're going to hit each of our key industries, that changes what you have to cram into the overall overview video.
Sure.
But it also lets you be, it helps you make the decisions on what to put in the other videos. So having that roadmap, whether it's directly related like that, or we know we're going to do a founder's story video, so we don't have to address that in our brand wide video.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think we've talked about this before, but we didn't start Storyboard Media to be like a video roadmap or a video strategy company. We kind of got there. And I know you tell the story a lot to prospects, and I know some of our audience have heard it, but kind of walk us through our evolution from where we started to where we got to requiring a strategy.
Well, like any entrepreneur, we were basically taking whatever business we can get, keeping the lights on, keeping things in motion, and trying to basically just have fun with doing what we love to do. And so probably the first two-ish years, and even, it still happens today every now and then, but we at least can see it coming.
Yeah.
But what would happen is we would make a great, founder story video, and the client would love it. We would love it. And we'd hand it off to them and say, great, here's your final invoice, whatever. And then, we'd all go our separate ways. We'd come back a couple months later when business was slow and wanting to maybe get that next video from that client. And so you just check in. Hey, how's the founder's video going for you guys? Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no. I think we got it up on our site a couple months ago. Oh, no, it was just on YouTube. It's on YouTube. And then you look, like I would already look. Yeah, it's on your intern's YouTube channel. It's not doing you a whole lot of good there with a title that says founders video dash final version 4. That's not doing any, like it doesn't even have your company name in it. There's no description. There's a lot of things missing. And so you're not, basically we didn't see our clients getting a return on the $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 investments they were making in these videos. And that was a problem for us from like renewing business.
Yeah.
It was also a problem for our clients, because who's going to hire somebody if they can't prove a return or provide a return?
It was a long, dark winter.
It was
at first year.
Yeah, we got a little maniacal at some points.
We'll do an episode on like our lowest moments.
Yeah.
One of these days.
Breaking Ben.
Now you're getting there. Getting warmed up.
So it was an arduous path getting to where we are now, and it's still, we're learning and adapting and doing things differently and improving that process. But it took us probably a year or so to really figure out, well, how do we solve this problem? Like if they're having a problem getting it out there and getting it in front of people and making sure that their clients see it, and somehow now their clients are spending more money with them, well, you kind of have to back up a little bit before the video's even made and say, well, where are we intending to put this? And do we have a version that's suitable for YouTube and all the other accoutrement that go with uploading video, thumbnails, titles, tags, descriptions, those things. But where else should it be? And how are you going to get people to see it? And so you really have to back up all the way to what is our first phase of effective video for business, which is building a strategy so that you can see. And even if it's just for one video, a roadmap is still really helpful to have that strategy for that concept. Our first client who bought a strategic session with us, and we kind of both felt our way through this process, and I'm really grateful for that time we had with that company. They were really good to us. And so that's kind of fast forward. We get to today where that's the majority of our engagements are starting with a 6-8 week strategic engagement where we get to build this roadmap.
I seem to recall we'd identified the problem. Like nobody knew why they were making the video they were asking, or why they were asking us to make the video they were asking us to make. And I seem to recall that it was a blog post or an article from Brennan Dunn, the W freelancing guy, that I think I was reading like over the weekend or something. And that was the first time I saw any reference to basically a paid strategic engagement. And the positioning was almost like just get paid to pitch. What was kind of the approach to it. But the key elements in there, like that was kind of the aha moment where we'd identified this problem. We didn't know quite how to go about it. And then all of a sudden that was the answer that was the most likely answer to the problem we had. And I think at that time we'd even I think a year earlier, we had gone through one of his courses and it was just over our heads. That was in our first year and we were still trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And this was maybe 6 or 12 months after that. And all of a sudden just the time was right. And so I'm sure we read about it, a paid strategic engagement. And I think, his positioning was like, make it 10% of the expected value of the actual contract. I mean, had very specific things like that that he was getting into. But I recall that being kind of the aha moment. And so, of course, we did what we did, which is take someone else's idea and just totally make it our own. Not that any of this is rewriting. I mean, not that any of this is necessarily novel. I mean, when we walk through it, it's, we walked through it with the Raleigh PR Society a couple years ago. And several people in the audience who've been at agencies for a while were like, oh, yeah, this makes total sense because this is what we do for whatever it is that they did.
I always have to say, like, guys, this is nothing new. If you're in marketing, this is nothing new building out these strategies. But people were treating video differently because it was new and they didn't really know. There's a lot of, video can be integrated in a lot of different ways. But if you don't take the time to think through those problems and even have somebody from the outside looking in to help you see where your roadblocks are or where where your opportunities are, that's really, really helpful.
Well, and I think there's two parts to that too. And I don't know if this is something we're supposed to be talking about later, but the outside perspective, I mean, we always talk about it as like the outside of the bottle, right? I mean, someone who isn't in the office working with the same product, with the same things day in, day out, you have a fresh perspective. You can see what the label on the bottle says, whereas the people in-house are just kind of stuck in it. Everybody's felt that before. I mean, I think that's pretty common.
That's why people go to a therapist.
Sure.
They don't understand their own problems.
Yeah. Well, and that's why so much of therapy is the therapist sitting there asking you things and then just pulling the threads and how does that make you feel? Oh, well, I hadn't thought about that because it just cascades into whatever. Yes. And very often we get to a point in these where we realize that we are a therapist for our clients in many situations. Completely unlicensed though. So that's healthy. But the other part too is, and we realized with that first client that we did a springboard, which is, I don't even know if we've said springboard.
I don't know if
the springboard is how we have kind of named and productized.
I don't even know if we had a name for it then.
I don't know if we did either. But the first client we did that with, we learned a valuable lesson too, because we did a couple full day workshops with them in their offices. And we had an existing relationship with the new CMO. She brought us in and she brought in basically the heads of the marketing department to have these discussions. And I think it was maybe 10:30 in the morning. I mean, we were maybe an hour and a half into this thing where somebody said, we've just never sat down and talked about these things like this. And we're talking about what are your goals for this year? Who are your personas? I mean, they had these kind of vague ideas of their personas, but they all had their own image, individual image of the personas. And so it took the group conversation to flesh those out and realize, well, this person had this image of the persona, but this other person had this slightly different image. And we were just helping them map it out, just facilitating a conversation that over and over and over again, the one that we just did was the founder and the guy that he brought in as CEO. And they have had all these thoughts, and also what was really interesting is you could see on their website, and what they do is develop websites, that they had very specific language, like in the hero section of their homepage. And one of the things that David did that I thought was really clever was he took some of the language that they told us in the interviews and he went into inspect element basically and changed the hero copy and like that first paragraph to straight up just quotes that they had given us in our conversations through the roadmap. And we put that in the roadmap presentation, and it made their homepage so much more understandable and accessible. And yet it was their words, but it was their words to someone else, as opposed to the abstract thoughts that they have in their head, trying to put that into some kind of verbal form on a web page.
Clients, you're going to know your company better than, I'm speaking to our clients. They're going to know their company way better than we ever will. It's our job to pull that stuff out and help them organize that. And that's, I guess, what the roadmap is.
Yeah, it's all there. It's just, it really is like a therapist. It's just like asking the right questions to get them to realize certain things, and those things present themselves to us. And all we do is capture them together.
Yep.
And then you get to that magic part is how do you take these things that are now truths and turn them into strategic concepts, those kinds of things. So before we like totally dive in to each of the steps, it's worth talking about the two potential audiences that we have for this podcast, because I think we're going to speak about it in general terms. We're probably going to speak about it a lot. Well, we're going to speak about our experience with it, but we're also going to speak about what it's done for our clients. So our two audiences primarily are people in the marketing space, right? That are marketing department employees, right? They're part of an in-house video team or an in-house marketing team, whatever it is. So that's one audience that, as you're listening, you'll be able to take away certain things. But we also know that we've got another chunk of our audience that are, freelance video makers, small agencies like ourselves, things like that. And so there's a lot where we can talk about how we approach it that they can take out of this. So we had discussed whether we wanted to tailor it to one audience or the other, but so we're coming from a position
we can't keep it straight in our own head.
Right. But we're coming from a position of these are our experiences, but we also know what it's done for our clients too. So there's opportunity for both audiences to be able to, at the end of this episode or these episodes, whatever it ends up being, be able to build a roadmap for your company or for one of your clients. So big picture. And I think if you go to potentially the first episode of this podcast, we break strategy down into two fundamental parts. There's the diagnosis and there's the prescription.
Same as if you would go to a car mechanic or a doctor or a therapist.
Yeah. I get most of my medical prescriptions from my mechanic.
Yeah.
So part one of the entire creating a video roadmap process is the diagnosis. And so that's really a deep dive. When you go to the doctor, it's, what symptoms are you presenting with? What's your diets? What's your work? How much do you work out? Like all those kinds of questions, depending on the issue you may be presenting. They're not going to just say, they're not going to just write you a prescription because you say, oh, I've got a rash on my back. They're going to want to
irresponsible. That is irresponsible.
Yes. Yes. And maybe not for a rash, but for something else that's malpractice, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to at least investigate what's going on. And they're going to be able, I'm just going to go with the rash thing. And they're going to be able to differentiate between eczema and ringworm and some kind of like fungal infection. And some treatments work better for one than the other or whatever, right? So God forbid they give you the wrong treatment and like the whole thing explodes.
Yeah. Also, do you have allergies? Do you, do you have a history?
This is gonna, interact with this other medication that you're currently taking. Whatever. And also what other conditions might be more prevalent because you have that, right? So if you've got high blood pressure, then you may be at advanced risk for heart disease or something like that. So they're aware of all of those things because they do that proper diagnosis. So for this is about looking at what you have and
like what you know as of right now.
Like what what's there and organizing all of that. And that's the whole point of the diagnosis phase. So some of the key pillars are, what are your goals?
That's the foundation of all of this.
Yeah.
What are we trying to do as a company, as a team?
What's this video, or what are these videos, or what do we need our video this year to do? Who are our audiences? What do we need to, how do we need to break them down? What do we know about them? What are their behavioral characteristics? What's their journey? What platforms and channels are we using or are available to us? How are we going to get this message to those audiences?
Where are they?
What platforms are we using that we want to integrate with? Those kinds of things. And then, of course, there are all kinds of secondary things like who's our competition? What's some of our key messaging? What are our differentiators?
What content do we have?
Right.
What's succeeded? What doesn't?
Yeah. So those are all the things that you want to take stock of, basically. And so it seems pretty straightforward that I could just sit down at my desk one day as an individual in a marketing department and say, oh, well, we need to increase our revenue by 12%. And we've got our Sarah persona and we've got our Jeff persona and, all the way through. But I feel like that's probably not going to be as effective as if you maybe engage some other people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's talking to multiple people and having multiple people ask.
Going off the doctor metaphor, the doctor really just gets to interview you. It's your body, it's your situation, it's your symptoms, whatever. Well, the business is made up of many different individuals. And those individuals all have different perspectives, responsibilities, worries, understandings. And so doing these...
Might I?
Okay.
One person at your company might be the heart, which your doctor listens to.
Okay.
And one might be the lungs, which your doctor listens to separately.
The lung bone's connected to the nose
stomach bone. Oh, both. That's why smell affects taste. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Doctors. Go on.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. So we get the opportunity to interview a lot of people who are involved in, whether it's the person who is just the one out there who's distributing and actually got their fingers on the keyboard and uploading it to places, or if it's the person who's in charge of the content strategy, or if it's the salesperson who's going to need to use this at the the last stage of the sale to really lock something in. All these people have different needs, and it's great to pull all that information in. What's really awesome about that is a lot of times you'll hear different things from different people on the same exact topic.
That's my favorite part.
Yeah, that alone is worth sometimes just straightening some of that shit out is worth the exercise.
Well, and there's two sides to it. One, when you interview multiple people and you hear similar points but said 3 or 4 different ways, you get a greater understanding of what the kernel of truth is in there.
Yep.
But I think another element to this too is that it really helps to have multiple people doing the interviewing. So we always have at least 2 people on our side.
That's true.
When we're directing these, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we learned early on was that you and I hear the exact same words differently. Mm-hmm. And no matter who's on the springboard for us, it just keeps happening. A client can say the exact same words. Both parties or 3 parties can hear the words
write down the same thing,
but they interpret them slightly differently. Yeah. And so a key part of this process that we'll get to then is after you've had all these kind of stakeholder conversations is then you have to go and kind of group everything and organize everything and synthesize everything. And that's where those perspectives come in so valuably, because you hear what 2 or 3 people thought that the person meant when they said something. And so that even it's twice or 3 times as much data basically to say this is what they're really trying to get at. Or you get to have that discussion about that didn't even occur to me. I heard this. And then you get to craft your follow-up based on... So when we were talking last time, you said this. What did you mean by that? And then you don't have to make these assumptions, but you get to highlight these opportunities where, and then of course there's the thing where there is no kernel of truth. And there's just straight up miscommunications. And someone on the team is thinking one thing and someone on the team is thinking the other. And I see that really careful about how you bring that up. But it's your responsibility at that point to bring that up.
I see that a lot, mostly when upper management is new to the company and comes in not knowing everything that the other people know. And they just have different inherited assumptions. And someone from one company could say a word like marketing qualified lead or a phrase, and it means something completely different in another company, but they never take the time to hash that stuff out.
Yeah, or, because I think we've all experienced this, somebody says, and that's where it goes to sales. But that's somebody from the marketing department thinking this is where it ends with us and it goes to sales. But then sales looking upriver is like, well, and that's when it comes to us, and there's this gap. Right. And marketing thinks they pass it off here and sales thinks they get it here. And then there's a whole lot of leads that are just falling through the cracks, in this gap or whatever that scenario may be. To pull on the doctor thread a little bit too, when I was in high school, I had a thing on the inside of my lip. And it's kind of rare. It's not dangerous or anything, but I went to a dermatologist.
It's like a tooth.
Got it. Check. There's just a scar there now. It's an ectopic salivary gland. Basically, it's in a place where it's not supposed to be. And anyway.
Don't go on.
Yeah. So simple thing. But the dermatologist that I went to, when I was a child, when I was in high school, was one of those teaching doctors. And so they had a lot of students all the time. Yeah. And so, of course, there I am, like 17, 18, whatever, at the dermatologist.
And they're all
He's
poking in your mouth.
He walks out and he starts pulling in the other doctors to say, hey, this is a great example of this, because he knows none of them had ever seen it in the field before. So then I'm sitting there, like, with my lip pulled out like this, with like 6 people staring.
In your whitey tighties.
Yes, like 6 people staring at my lip and like poking it, whatever. And then he, of course, it was like a TV show or something, because then he just removed it, a little scalpel, pulled it out, whatever. But it was his first chance to show all of those students
how to do that. That's basically what we're doing.
That's essentially what we're doing.
6 or 7 people prodding these companies.
Yes. And now we have a little bit of perspective as to how they may feel when we dig in a little too much.
So we've got a lot still to get to on the diagnosis phase, but why don't we take a break and hear from our new sponsor, Plant Magic?
Oh, our new sponsor, Plant Magic?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you gone off your regularly prescribed meds? Are you looking for something a little more organic? Do you like tripping balls? Then you should try Plant Magic's injectable shrooms. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Step 1. Boil your Plant Magic's injectable shrooms into a tea. Step 2. Draw your tea into a syringe and plunge it into your favorite vein. Step 3. Die probably. Plant Magic's injectable shrooms. Definitely don't do this.
Wow. That's the copy, huh?
That's it. So now some people may know that Plant Magic is like your, I don't want to say nickname necessarily.
Well, it's not trademarked, so I guess anybody can use it.
Yes, but like your Slack handle is Plant Magic.
Yep.
Your Gmail is Plant Magic, and
it was even on my bike at college. It was spray painted on my bike.
Yeah. Right. So, so this is actually from a news story that I heard in the last couple of weeks. A guy bought some psilocybin, whatever, mushrooms. So he had gone off his meds for bipolar disorder. Had been reading about like LSD and things like that. Bought some shrooms, some magic mushrooms, boiled them into a tea, but instead of drinking the tea, put it into a syringe and plugged it and plunged it directly into his bloodstream. And the fungus started growing
inside his bloodstream.
Yeah. And so he first started presenting symptoms where he was tripping balls first. But then he started to lose motor control, motor function. He started speaking in completely incoherent, tongues. They were real words, but nothing made sense.
Yeah.
he couldn't even, perhaps not surprisingly, he still lived with his parents. His parents took him to the emergency room, and he couldn't even tell him what he had done. Like, in his mind, he was probably saying, oh, I bought some shrooms, I boiled them down, and I injected them into my blood. But they were hearing, like, Cadillac Super 50 highlight marker dry erase board. And so, of course, it took him a while, but that's when they eventually did blood tests, and they found the fungus growing throughout his veins. Freaky. His organs started to shut down. And last I heard, he was still alive. He was in a coma, but he is still alive. Still in ICU, but...
I could never do shrooms with my parents around. It would freak me out.
I mean, I don't think we need to be judging this guy's decision-making ability right now. I don't think, oh, well, my parents are here, so I'll inject these later.
Yeah.
But given your fondness for non-psychedelic mushrooms,
I mean, they're both great.
Yeah. So I'm not saying, like, this is your company.
Yeah, it was...
But, I'm trying to do the research and find out who the silent partner is involved with this company. And they won't tell me. But, so disclaimer, don't do any of that. But you can also Google it. It's really a fascinating medical story.
Yeah.
And I probably wouldn't have done this if the guy had died, just out of respect. But
well, this is getting released in
well, that's true.
a couple of weeks. So.
That's true. So yes, thank you to our new sponsor, Plant Magic, and their new product, Plant Magic's Injectable Shrooms. I will also tell you that when I saw the first headline, I shared it on Slack with David, and I said, this is something Justin would do.
No, I would not. I would never inject. I don't have a fear of needles, but oh man, putting stuff into your blood.
Yeah. Well, and it also has the whole like put bleach into your blood to cure.
Do it yourself.
To cure COVID. And I mean, it's in that same vein of story. Thank you.
Very good. How would you instruct another agency if they were going to take this on? How would you instruct them to go about conducting this diagnosis phase?
I like to break the people that you can talk to into two groups. So they're the stakeholders, right? They kind of become the primary group. So the stakeholders are the ones who have some responsibility for the video.
Is there a certain number you're going for?
It depends. I honestly think a 3 to 5 is kind of ideal. 3 perspectives. I don't know. 3 perspectives is 2. 2 is better than 1. 3 is better than 2. 4 to 5 gets to, I mean, these are real deep conversations, and you just start to hear a lot of the same things over and over again. Mm-hmm. So I think 3 is the sweet spot. But it depends on the company. Mm-hmm. It depends. But these are the people who are ultimately responsible for this content. So it could be a senior vice president of marketing who has said, yes, we're going to spend X number of dollars on video. Mm-hmm. And we need it to do this, this, and this for us this year. Mm-hmm. That's someone who is invested in the success of
They own
the
budget.
Yes. And they've got to staff accordingly and put the right resources out there and all those kinds of things, right? And then maybe you've got a, digital marketing manager who's going to be the more day-to-day contact with you as an agency, or they're responsible for making sure that the projects get managed and that the content that's supposed to be made gets made. And then maybe you've got the person who is their lead copywriter, or there's some kind of subject matter expert, or someone who's involved in the actual making of that content. They've got that perspective. They write all the blogs, so maybe they've got that like tone of voice, and they know what the key messaging is, and those kinds of things. Those people I would put as the primary stakeholders, and those are the conversations I want to have first. Mm-hmm. And then the entire secondary group almost comes out of those first conversations. As you're digging into these things, who else could I talk to get a perspective about this particular thing? Mm-hmm. So oftentimes we'll be talking to the marketing department, and some misalignment between marketing and sales comes up. Marketing maybe feels like their job is to produce effective content for the sales team to use, but the sales team just isn't using it for some reason. Well, that gives us the opportunity, that gives you the opportunity to then reach out to someone in sales and talk to them from the person who's actually supposed to be pushing the content out there. Why aren't you? Is it this stuff is disorganized and I don't have time to figure out where what I'm looking for is? Well, that's something that should be addressed. Is it the content that marketing is making isn't what my prospects need to hear?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they all look great, but like I've already talked about these things or whatever it may be. So oftentimes we'll talk to someone in sales, we'll survey the sales team, whatever, those kinds of things. That's a great secondary conversation. And sometimes even on the kickoff, when we're kind of explaining the difference between primary and secondary, one of the primaries will say, oh, by the way, we need to get so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so on these because they're, director of product development and they want to be doing some product marketing videos. So it's not a product marketing person, but that's the person who's going to be able to tell us the most about the product so that we can recommend the right way to break out certain content, things like that. So the primary ones are responsible for the project. The secondary ones are basically the extra perspective and the like super detail on specific parts. And we try to hold all of these over 2 weeks because you could do it for 3 months.
Sure.
But at some point you're going to forget what happened in a conversation 3 months ago.
So you condense this as much as you can.
As much as you can.
Yeah.
And of course, the more, and that's why I think when you get to primary stakeholders, 4 or 5 people, it feels like it gets exponentially harder to schedule everybody. When you add one more person, it's just that much harder to get everyone scheduled.
So the primary stakeholders get the questions about goals, audience, platforms, competition, key messaging, differentiators, and resources.
Yeah.
And then secondary conversations are more targeted and specific to their relevant actions involving the material.
So it's also worth noting that whenever possible, we try to send kind of a pre-interview survey or questionnaire to the primary stakeholders.
Yeah, what's the purpose of that?
Those are very similar client to client. Those are some of those in 100 words describe, your top initiatives, your top marketing initiatives for this year. They're the things that they can spend. I think the last one we did, it takes 7 minutes to go through. But it starts to prime them thinking about the types of questions we want to ask. Because part of this too is when you're doing this, everyone seems to put with video in parentheses at the end of every question you ask.
So give an example.
So if you say, what are your goals this year? If you're asking the SVP of marketing, I want to know what their marketing goals are for the entire marketing department for the company that year. And they're hearing, what are your goals for video this year?
And they respond with that question.
Yes. Yeah. What are your goals for this year? Well, I want video to be something we do more of. Okay. Well, that's why we're here. But tell me about your specific goals that you're measured on for this year. And then if they do video, then you say, okay, and what about other content? And so when you put the question out there, you can actually provide that kind of context, outside of video, what are the content initiatives you're doing, those kinds of things. So you get to prime them to start, understand that you're going to be talking about bigger picture stuff when you're talking to them. But it also provides us context because so often these are new client relationships for us.
Yeah.
And so we've basically done enough research in the sales process and between the kickoff and the first stakeholder conversations that we know kind of what they're trying to accomplish, big picture. They know that they've got a campaign, a product video campaign that they want to do. And that's what this whole springboard is about. Or they got a bunch of money to spend on video because they've never done video before. So what are the ways for their entire marketing department to utilize video? So we know about that much going on. Going in. These surveys provide us a lot of context and a lot of places, a lot of opportunities to follow up on those answers. So instead of spending 15 minutes on tell me about your role, what are your primary responsibilities, what are you accountable for? That stuff's already been answered in the survey. And I can highlight certain things, and I can say, after the 3 minutes of, small talk, I can say, now on your survey, you indicated that XYZ. Let's talk more about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you especially when you've got like an hour with these people.
Is an hour enough time, you feel like?
Not really. I've been adding some pillars recently because we've been doing more of these. I feel like 90 minutes I could get through everything I need to, but there's always follow-up conversations.
Sure.
So you've always got the opportunity to go back and say, okay, here's some things that we didn't touch on. Let's, and that can be through an email or whatever. So it really just helps provide context and also guide that hour of live, like real-time conversation to basically all your questions are follow-up questions. So you get to dig deeper on the things you want to, and then you've got all of this other context that, is just there. So I don't know why we brought up those in the first place.
Just part of the process. Tell me more about the small talk. Do you like there are go-to questions for you?
I hate small talk.
How was your Christmas?
So
I'm joking. You don't have to.
No, it's worth.
Well, because they are strangers to some degree, right?
Yeah, I think you have to build a rapport, especially from our perspective. We're at the very beginning of what we're hoping is a long and collaborative partnership. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of getting to understand how people operate. Mm-hmm. What's their sense of humor? How serious do they take this? Like, are they kind of spacey, or like because they've got this time blocked off, are they like 100% in?
Are they prepared or
prepared? Exactly? Did you get the survey back from them? Mm-hmm. More than 5 minutes before the call starts or whatever. So, but it's also, and I think this just goes to like, especially with video conferences and video chats, you just can't have that like everybody's on and like nobody's starting the meeting kind of silence thing. Like so you got to be prepared for a little bit of that, like starting to get to know each other. But again, you've only got 60, maybe 90 minutes to get into some serious questions.
Yeah.
That these people have some really serious answers to. And you've got to be able to be nimble enough to kind of know where to follow up in that time. So you don't really have a whole lot of time for small talk, but be yourself. I mean, we try to put some of our personality in the survey also. Mm-hmm. Like just ask questions in a certain way or use the description, to just be a little bit snarky or something like that just kind of sets that tone. I think it's also important that we note that each of these stakeholder conversations really should happen one stakeholder at a time. Mm-hmm. It's so, especially with all the talk that we've just been doing about like, getting the most out of the time, it could be tempting to have all three of those primary stakeholders in one 90-minute conversation.
And they'll likely ask for that.
Yes. One person will dominate that conversation and the other two people will say,
just nod.
No, I think she was right about that. Mm-hmm. That she pretty much covered everything.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help you. That defeats the purpose of talking to multiple people.
Yeah.
And so you've really got to get people one-on-one. And be able to ask them these questions. And it's also really important that you organize these questions in advance. Mm-hmm. So if the pillars are goals, audience, platforms, competition, content, key messaging, differentiators, resources, have your kind of notes document broken down into those suggestions, into those sections with some suggested questions in there. You're not necessarily going, you don't want to be a robot and just go question to question and not follow up on things. But let that then kind of guide the conversation, because oftentimes people will start talking about, CRM platform when they're talking about their current distribution channel. So you may not have asked them yet about like attribution or integrating with their CRM or anything. But when they're talking about, we just use YouTube embeds. We have a YouTube channel and we embed YouTube videos on our site, but they've also like created a lot of other content that is really gated, and they're using HubSpot or Salesforce or something like that to capture those leads and score those leads, but they're not doing it with video. Like sometimes they'll just jump to that, and maybe they talk about goals, but one of their goals is to engage this persona more. So you haven't asked them about audience yet, but they're like jumping into. So people are going to jump around And you've got to be able to just kind of go with the flow, but you've also got to make sure that you have what you need from them to be able to say, because of this, this, and this, we recommend a video series that does this, speaks to these people, gets them to do this on these platforms, whatever.
I don't know that either of us have put much thought into this, but so I'm just throwing this out there in case either of us have an answer. How might you go about doing this internally as like without hiring an external agency?
How would you go about doing this internally without?
I imagine if you're doing it internally, well, maybe you don't even have a video producer on staff. You could just be building out your strategy and then bringing that to a producer.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. So I'm immediately drawn to a springboard we started to do internally for ourselves for our own content. And depending on the organization, I think there's an opportunity to make building a roadmap part of a like onboarding process for a new employee. It could be a really interesting way for somebody to come in and get to understand what the company and the department is all about. If you gave them this framework and said, I need you to schedule time with myself, this person, and this person, and the first thing we're going to have you do in your first 2 or 3 weeks here is develop what you think a good video, and of course it could be video roadmap, social media content roadmap, whatever. It could be an interesting way with someone who's relatively new to give them the opportunity to dig in, and especially if it's like your first video hire. If this person is supposed to be responsible for the video content, that could be something.
You've got to choose. I mean, the most important thing is you've got to choose. Well, because you mentioned the importance of having 2 people listening while the stakeholder is talking. But those 2 people who are listening have to be intelligent. Not to say, I don't know, like they just have to have like a...
Or just good listeners.
Sure. And then they have to, in order to put that prescription together, they have to know video.
Yes, but that's another episode. That's the next part.
Okay.
I mean, look, two people interviewing the stakeholders is better than one.
Yeah.
But one is better than none. So if you give it to one person to do, it's you can't just do it on yourself. Basically, you can't say, oh well, I'm the digital marketing director. I know everything that I can fill in the blanks myself. That's just not the way to go about this. If you're the digital marketing director, you may have some ideas, but you need to ask the people around you these questions also. And if there's only one of you, then there's only one of you. But I think the point is don't just write out goals with like a paragraph box below it, an audience with a paragraph box, and just fill it in yourself. It's you're not going to get anything new. Than kind of what's in your head anyway. Now you may consider yourself a stakeholder also. And so, interview your boss and one of the people who help support you as primary stakeholders, and then go back and as you're trying to compile it, add your own thoughts, things that maybe they didn't say that you think are important. But yeah. And so, I mean, I guess the answer is it depends on the size of the organization and what kind
the
of
skill level,
people resources you have. But you're right. It takes enough of an analytical person with enough video experience to ultimately be able to say, because these are my goals, these are the types of videos I think we need to make. And there's a lot more to it than that. That's the prescription part, but like that's the magic part.
Somebody can diagnose their Salvatore client, whatever right? They could figure it out.
His name isn't Salvatore. It's
but it's not likely that you're going to get the rash right or the prescription right or anything like.
Right. In fact, I thought it was like a pimple on the inside of my head, and it just didn't go away. And so, I mean, fortunately, I was still in high school, so I think my mom was like, "Okay, I'm taking you to the doctor to get this looked at." If I had been in like college or an adult, I'd probably still have it. I'd just be like flicking it with my tongue the whole time.
Ew. Just delete all that.
No, leave it all in.
I haven't been involved in one of our springboards for quite some time now. Just fortunate enough to have the amount of business where we're all handling different things.
Yeah.
So it's mostly been you and David and some other folks. But what are some of the questions you're using right now that are really pulling that gold, mining that gold from these conversations?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, I've got them all kind of broken down into the pillars. And this is probably something, honestly, that we can take some names off of and publish. You can find it right here at the specialized link that David's going to make up.
If we ever get around to.
So I've got one this afternoon. And so the document that I've got prepared for that, it first of all, I've got all the survey answers above it that I've pasted in, so I can kind of review that and refer to those in one document. But when I get to like the convo questions section, starting with goals, and some of these are going to be more relevant, but they're also just like conversation starters. So what are you trying to accomplish with this video? That's probably not something I'm going to ask today because we're looking at an entire marketing department. So I may just change that to like, what are you trying to accomplish with video? What are your company objectives this year? Oh, well, the CEO has said that, we need to increase revenue by this and profitability by this and whatever. What are the marketing department's goals this year? And then what are your personal objectives this year? So that kind of goes from like, well, just what are you trying to do to company, business unit, personal? Because a lot of this too, we're trying to make our clients the hero, right? So how can we help them succeed? How can we help them look good to their boss? Those kinds of things. So those are literally the only 4 questions I have. Based on the answer to probably whichever one I decide to ask first, we're going to have a 15-minute discussion on goals. And I will follow up with questions like, okay, you said you want to increase MQLs. Do you have a particular number? Is it a 25% increase? Or are you trying to go from 27 a week to 35 a week or whatever? Try to get those specific kinds of things. Those aren't questions I would put on this page because maybe only a third of the people I'm going to be talking to actually have that as a goal. But that's where that kind of active listening comes in. That's where you dig in. So those are the only 4 questions I have for goals. Then I'm kind of listening for, are we going into any of the other sections? But if we're not, then I say, okay, great. Let's talk about audience. Who are we speaking to? What are your personas? And I like positioning it like that. And also, if I reference one of the survey questions, one of the survey questions is on a scale of 1 to 10, how detailed or developed are your buyer personas and their corresponding journeys? So like 0, and this is, I think, where we put in some of our personality, is like 0 is like persona, you say, or something like that. What's a persona? 5 is like, I think I know who they are. And 10 is like, I know their name, address, mother's maiden name, how many, yeah. So like for this one, for example, I know that their answer was 7 out of 10. So they're going to have a relatively detailed personas. But if I don't have that information, by just asking, what are your audience personas, the way that they answer that question is going to tell me a lot about how detailed they are. Because they're either going to say, well, we've got 4 primary personas. And maybe they have names, maybe they don't. But one is a senior vice president of marketing at a tech company that like already we're talking about, okay,
it's a little more sophisticated.
This is more sophisticated. So I'm taking, and the other people on the call are taking copious notes here. And
you transcribe it too.
Yes. To go through and make sure that we don't miss any of those personas, because those are going to be a key element of the recommendations that we make, because it's, a video that does this for these people on these platforms, getting them to do that. So we're going to probably say, this is a video for the Greg persona. And then after they've,
Do you watch Succession?
No.
Greg is awesome.
And then, okay, well, with each of those personas, or depending on how detailed they were, it's like, what is your customer journey, or what are each of those personas' journeys? How do they go from never having heard of you to becoming a client? And so again, they're going to have a different level of detail. And you just kind of have to go off that. Another, and we've talked about this in multiple episodes, what questions are they asking at each stage of that journey? That's the easiest way to start to map out a roadmap, is just by saying, these are the questions that are being asked. This is the content that answer these questions, and these are the gaps. So this is where we're going to start with video. Where do your audiences spend the most time in their journey? What inefficiencies or speed bumps do you see? That's a way to be effective quickly, right? If somebody's stalling out in the consideration phase.
Oh, okay. In the journey.
Right. Then let's prioritize some content to get them from consideration into decision. And then this one kind of goes to, I don't actually have content as its own. Oh yeah, I do. So this is a good time then to say, and what content do you have that currently addresses those questions? So that's another where, like, I'm in the audience section, but I'm starting to address the content kind of stuff. And then of course, outside of people, like if they have no personas, then at least your backup question is, are there any specific industries you're targeting? And then you can kind of go through the same thing with industries. How specific do they get in those industries? I like asking some questions about process. What does the pre-sale process look like? It's interesting to hear that from a marketing person. You get a lot of ideas about marketing and sales alignment through that. How do marketing and sales interface or align? You're going to hear a lot of those, like, marketing people are going to kind of shit on salespeople, and salespeople are going to kind of shit on marketing people, or they're going to say it's just one big, like, we're all kind of lumped together here. That's going to help you identify the opportunities to how you might share content, how involved might salespeople be, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, where's the overlap?
Channels and platforms, right? What distribution channels do you utilize for content? Which ones really work for you? Which ones do you suck at? Part of what we do is we go through and we just look at those channels and see what kind of engagement are they getting on those channels. Even just how many followers are there. I mean, we had one client that had like 3 YouTube subscribers, and like 6,000 people following their company on LinkedIn. Well, LinkedIn's got to be one of those channels that we distribute content on. And sure, we can put stuff on YouTube, but like, we're gonna reach more people if we're putting it on LinkedIn. It would be irresponsible of us not to. And then you get to go through and do some specific questions. So here's one kind of that I referenced earlier. On your site, I see lots of gated content, but just YouTube embeds of a few videos on your resources page. Why aren't you capturing lead info data from video also? Is that something you'd like to be able to do? I mean, that's a no-brainer question, because if they're putting that much gated content on their site to capture that information that isn't video, they're likely going to want to be able to do that with their video content too. So that gets to what kind of platform recommendations are we looking at? That's a fundamental part of this of the roadmap is not just here's the content we're going to make, but here's how we're going to get it to people. And part of that is here's the platform we're going to use on our site to capture people's information, integrate with our CRM, whatever that stuff is. So those are the kind of the primary pillars. And then, key messaging. Why do your clients buy and use your product? What problems are you solving for them? That then just triggers that whole conversation. And people tend to use a lot of their like defined messaging in some of their talk track too. So I really like when I'm taking the notes too, is I actually like to put quotes around as close to the direct quotes as I can get. So like my notes are kind of my interpretation of something. But when I hear something that I really like from someone, I try to get it as word for word as possible. You can always go back to the recording or the transcript. But I put quotes around it because to me, that lends more credence to that comment than maybe my interpretation of a comment, which might be a different note. So a lot of their key messaging is just going to come out in a lot of their, a lot of their other conversation, especially when you start to get to competition. I lump competition and differentiators because basically it's like, well, these are our competition, but here's what we do better than them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Here's what they do better than. Who do you see as your biggest competition? What do they do that you don't? What do you do that they don't? And then, of course, we're going to come back on the back end. We're going to look at those competitors, look at their sites, look at their YouTube channels, things like that. What is their messaging? What are they saying their differentiators are? How are they presenting? Are they good at using video? Do they suck at using video? Is there an opportunity to stand out because their top 3 competitors? I mean, we've got one client where we heard like their top 2 or 3 competitors, and all 3 of those competitors' videos looked exactly the same. And they were stock footage of construction sites. And I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if some of them even used the same stock video clips. And so we were able to just creatively go a completely different direction. And that's just going to stand out from all that other content. So, and then there's this whole like other questions. What keeps you up at night? If in 3 years you're happy in your personal and professional life, what has happened? What does success look like for video or this video? Those kinds of, follow-up questions that help you understand what they're going to be drawn to, what they're looking for.
Is that what you mean by the mountain?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of taken the mountain out of this, but a way that we used to do it was, you start, you ask them about themselves, ask them about their department, ask them about their company, and then come back to their department and themselves. So you kind of, as you go through the goal, so the personal goals, what are your goals? What are the department goals? What are, the audience? You're kind of moving up that mountain, and then you always bring the conversation back to something personal. What makes this work for you? So you start with that small talk. You start with that, tell me about your role. You start with that, what are you trying to do? What's the most important thing in your job? And then you get into these kind of big picture conversations, and then you always come back to them as a person. What makes this a success for you? So you can get their motivations. And that's important, not so much from being able to develop a strategic concept, but understanding what you can sell to someone. And I don't mean like what an external vendor can sell to a client. I mean, how can you convince someone or help prioritize certain things? And if you can take their motivations into account on how you might prioritize things, it's more likely to get that thing greenlit. So if you know that your boss is really motivated by X, Y, and Z, it may help you make some tiebreakers on which content to produce first, because they're more likely to say, okay, I'll give you the budget to do this.
If they're more enthusiastic about it too, it's going to make the production process a lot, hopefully a lot better.
Another key element outside of those questions, depending on the relationship that you have with the client or with your boss or coworkers or whatever, an element that wasn't on that list of questions was what resources are available. Oftentimes, we pose this as part of the halftime report, which we'll get to in a second. But what's actually available to us to make this stuff? For us, it's almost always about what's the budget that's been set aside to make a video. Because this is what we do, we can come up with 30 strategic concepts that could be completely relevant for a marketing department. But if they have enough budget for 3 videos, it at the very least helps us prioritize which ones to make first. And then the remaining 27 concepts are stuff we'll get to over the next couple of years.
Or even how to make, like, to what level do we make these?
And these are the videos that we bring in, an outside production company for. These are the ones that, I, as the in-house video department, do in-house. And these are the ones that I can have our salespeople do as one-off videos. And I can train them how to do that or whatever. So it's important to understand what those kind of, money, people, time, resources are before you start planning out a roadmap, because it's just going to help you be more efficient in how you present that kind of stuff. And again, depending on the relationship, that kind of dictates when you have that conversation. If it's an existing client and you're doing a roadmap for a particular new initiative of theirs, that's something you can probably have in one of the stakeholder conversations if you haven't already with the client. So that's a key element. And then you take the answers to all those questions from your primary and secondary conversations, from each of the interviewers, and then you all have to come together and put that enormous amount of information together in some kind of organized manner.
So why don't we begin the next one by describing what is in the halftime document or presentation, and walking through maybe even some examples or something. And then I think from there we'll be able to get it. Like basically the halftime report is your foundation for building your roadmap for moving forward. So
that's a good tease.
Yes. Well, we gotta.
They want to hear about the halftime. They're gonna have to wait.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Let's hear from our sponsor again.
Yeah. Sure.
Just to have a slightly different read.
I feel like
Our new sponsor is Plant Magic. Have you gone off your regularly prescribed meds? Are you looking for something a little more organic? Do you like tripping balls? Then you should try Plant Magic's injectable shrooms. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Step 1, boil your Plant Magic's injectable shrooms into a tea. Step 2, draw said tea into a syringe and plunge into your favorite vein. Step 3, die probably. Plant Magic's injectable shrooms. Definitely don't do this.
Which one's your favorite vein?
It's in that like place between the crotch and the leg. Like right down here. Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's just a good one because nobody looks there.
Right.
So
you don't see the tracks on your arm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Also notoriously difficult to get a vein here. When I go in for labs, I tell them up front, I was like, good luck. And they're like, I do this for a living. I got this. And then 10 minutes later, they're like, I'm so sorry. Let's try the other arm. But yeah, it's a good one because nobody looks. Nobody thinks to look there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's see. What did we talk about today? We talked about essentially part 1 of the creating your own roadmap process,
which is a three-part process, I guess, right?
Yeah, sure.
Diagnose. The diagnosis is in the halftime. So I'm thinking like the stakeholder conversations, halftime, prescription, roadmap.
Sure. Right. We're gonna have multiple people interview multiple stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna ask them about goals, audience, platforms and channels, competition, content, key messaging, differentiators, and eventually what resources do we have available. And that is all of the information that you need to then synthesize in the halftime report to then be able to start coming up with your strategic concepts. Mm-hmm. So that's what we discussed today. On part 2, we will get into the halftime report itself, as well as how to develop strategic concepts based on all of the data that we have. So make sure to subscribe and be notified the next time that episode is available, which is probably going to be
2 weeks.
2 weeks. It would be mean of us to break them up with other stuff in between. All right.
Or you just never publish it and then they'd have to hire us.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Mm.